What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN. And if you just look at the box score for this one, you might be like, "Oh, okay, so the Spurs battled with a team that was better than them." Um, but that was not the story of this game, Ethan. Ethan, how about you tell everybody how you experienced this game, because I feel so bad for you. As much as there was, some good stuff at the end that you got to see, like
Mhm.
just explain to people how your day went and how you walked into this game.
Yeah, so I had a spontaneous work dinner, so I couldn't watch the first, I thought only first quarter. So I told Jude that. Dinner went longer than expected, missed the entire first half. Jude texts me. He's like, "Oh, no worries, bro. We've actually been playing pretty well. Like, it's competitive. Like, first quarter we were up. Second quarter, Orlando got some momentum, but still competitive. Like, it'll be a good second half. Good game so far." I'm like, okay, cool, cool, cool. So I grab a cup of water, sit back on the couch, turn the Spurs on, and the third quarter was just a complete and utter disaster. So I got to watch the Spurs implode, followed by a series of texts from Jude saying, "I don't understand what's happening. This was a nightmare." And then the fourth quarter, my patience was tested because we continually just like made like little comebacks, and I was like, "Should I get my hopes up? No. Should I get my hopes up? No." And then there it was. We had that incredible comeback where we ultimately lost by 10 points.
Yeah. Um I that maybe this is just an exaggeration, but we've watched most games this season, Ethan, and I feel like that was the biggest dichotomy
Mm,
that I've seen between a first half and a second half
mm,
all year long.
yeah.
Really, it's more in the third quarter. Um but at the same time, I just with the way that the third quarter looked versus the first half, it was just like night and day. And Nazkraz does bring up a good point that I was about to get into here in the comments. He says, to be fair, they had already imploded in the second quarter. Ethan just saw a continuation of that.
Mm,
LOL. I would still argue that it wasn't anywhere near as bad as the third quarter, but we did lose by 9 in that quarter, and definitely Orlando started to get their rhythm in that quarter. And I even texted Ethan kind of in this or in the third quarter. I was like, I was gonna say with the way that the second quarter went, I was like, like because it wasn't as big of a gap and it was still a 6 point game going into halftime, and it was only a nine, as I say, only a 9 point win in the second quarter. Obviously, that's still not something that's still a significant amount. But at the same time, it wasn't anything in comparison to the third quarter and what we saw. And we'll get to those numbers in a second. Um, but I was kind of telling, and maybe this was just me looking in Spurs colored glasses, but kind of
mhm,
how I was reading it, like you just said, in the second quarter, I was like, obviously they're not playing as well. I didn't like how the intensity let up. And you really even saw that at the end of the first quarter, which we'll get into here in a second, when the Magic went on an 8-0 run to end that and then kind of continued that momentum throughout the second. But it wasn't just constant turnovers every possession, and it was still like we were in the game. And a little bit of that did have to do with us winning the first quarter, but like I was kind of getting to, I was kind of telling myself that, like, okay, the Magic are better than us. Like, this is them, just starting to execute, get in their rhythm, and kind of get in their flow that they didn't have in the first quarter, and kind of picking up on some of our tendencies, playing against Wemby, etc. Um, but like Nazcraz says, in the third quarter, when I saw what happened, I realized that, you know, really the implosion had kind of began in the second quarter.
mm. It's sad. I didn't get to witness that second quarter, but you can be sure I will go back and watch the highlights from that first half.
Yeah, it still was a drop off, kind of like I texted you. I made the comparison that it was kind of similar to the Washington game in that sense.
Mm,
Obviously, we won the Washington first quarter by more than we won this first quarter. Um, but like I also said, there was that 8-0 run when it was 30-19 with about 3 minutes left, which was the Spurs' largest lead of the game. I'll scroll down here so you can see when we had that 11-point lead. And after that, everything went downhill, Ethan, even though it wasn't as exacerbated um, in the first half, which is why, like, if you're just looking at the score, it was still a 6 point game going into halftime. But the way that we're going to do this episode is because Ethan missed the first quarter, or excuse me, the first half. I'm just going to run through the first half here in the game flow, and then I'll dish it to Ethan for that second half. So you ready to go, Ethan?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. So I'll just read my notes like I normally had. We were feeding Wemby to start like we normally do. I don't think he had a ton of points in the first quarter, but the point was we were looking for him, and he was able to score a couple times. Jeremy was really active in the first quarter. I believe he had 9 points in the first quarter. He might have had 6 rebounds in that first quarter, if I remember correctly as well. I'm not sure about that number, but I'm pretty sure he had like 8 or 9 points in the first quarter. And he caught this lob, Ethan, from Devin. I sent you a picture or a tweet of it where, it was a reverse lob that he caught, and it was kind of through contact a little bit too. And it was when it was early in the game, but it was still like a little bit into the game, significantly. It was at the 10-4. We were up 10-4 around the, I could go check the text I sent you to really see the timestamp here. I'm going to do that just because I can. At around the 8-minute mark, the 8:36 mark, in the first quarter, we were up 10-4 through that lob. It was 12-4. It was really similar to that same energy, that you saw in the fourth quarter with the crowd and everything. We had good defensive intensity to start. Jeremy and Wemby were really running things early. Like, obviously we saw Vassell get to work this game. He had 26, was the leading scorer. We saw that a lot in the fourth. But you could really see the emphasis was on Jeremy early, Ethan, after that 2-point game against the Wizards on Monday. So I liked that they were emphasizing getting him back into rhythm. And then I also liked that he was executing. The other thing I wrote down in the first quarter, patient and controlled offense for us. There was one, I'm forgetting exactly who it was. I think it was either Jeremy or Wemby, but maybe it was somebody else. But I just remember they could have gone up and forced a shot, but they waited for the pump fake and then went for it. Where you saw in that third quarter how rushed we were on offense. We weren't seeing that, at least in the beginning of the game. Devin did start scoring a little bit in the latter half of the quarter. The other thing I wrote down, just as the quarter continued to progress with Jeremy's effort, you could tell Jeremy came in pissed off and, had something to prove kind of after that 2-point game. And Paulo only scored, I believe he didn't score until the second quarter, Ethan, but I might have missed it because when I thought his first basket was, Sean and Bill said that it was, it was his 4th point of the game. So he may have had 1 basket in the first quarter, but still, like he at the midway through the second quarter, because I wrote this down not to jump all around, he had 4 points. So Jeremy did a really good job of forcing him to pass off early in the game. I noticed, I didn't know that Keldon was going to be out, and I saw that obviously as the game started. I did know that Zach was going to be out, but Keldon had a big old bandage on his elbow, and Sean and Bill were saying it was a laceration, and I think it was just an ice pack, but that was just I noticed that. I know that doesn't necessarily pertain to the game, but that was something I had written down from the first quarter, and it was just like I was like, oh damn, that I didn't see that in the last game. And here's where the negative begins, Ethan. Finishing quarters is an issue still. It was like when they made the first basket when we were up 30-19, Ethan, and cut it to 30-21, and there were still around 2 minutes left. I was like, man, we got to finish this quarter. We can't. That's because that's just a theme that we've been talking about all year. And they went on an 8-0 run to make it 30-27. When at around the 2-minute mark, we had our largest lead of the game at 11. And that's where things really started to get tough for us, Ethan. But what are kind of your thoughts, just so I don't continue talking for the eternity of this podcast? What are kind of your thoughts on hearing that?
Jeremy had 18 points. You said he had 9 of those in the first quarter, roughly. In what ways? Were they in a variety of ways, or mostly like backdoor cuts, easy baskets?
I would say, well, there was the lob that I mentioned,
Right.
and then also really just, he took some people off the dribble. In the 31-13 performance against the Blazers, we saw him have a lot of pump fakes, where he kind of drives inside and then uses his post game off his pivot foot. kind of the normal Jeremy offense is what I would
Mm,
say. It may not be the prettiest, but at the same time, it was just him playing his game. You know, the
mm.
turnaround jumpers. He did have a couple drives, but how you when you think of Jeremy scoring, that it was kind of just the usual is what I would say.
Okay. And I know you said we got off to a great start, and then the Orlando went on an 8-0 run. So was it, how do I put this? Was our defense stifling them early, or did they just look a little bit out of sync and then decided to turn on the energy and their shots started to fall?
I think I would say a little bit of both. I think they weren't playing their best, but I think also our defensive intensity was much higher to start the game than it was throughout the middle of the game.
Which continues that theme of immaturity. Once we get up a little bit, we tend to back off. And then I'm assuming when that happened, their defensive intensity also picked up.
Yes, and that 8-0 run is what kind of sparked their second quarter, which
Mhm.
I'll jump into now, where we did lose 30-21. And you can see, even though the third quarter it's only a 3 point or a 4 point difference. If you watch the game tonight, you saw how bad that third quarter was. There were like four straight possessions, where it was turnovers. We couldn't even make a pass. It felt like, but going to the second quarter, we had around an even start. We were just kind of trading baskets at first. Malachi was fighting on the boards early, which I like to see because it was like, okay, he's coming in and trying to contribute, not scoring wise, which is usually his go-to. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So I liked that after the DNPs, he was in there, trying to make an impact in some sort of fashion. Um, Paulo's second basket was at 5:30. Um, and then kind of middle of the quarter, I would say we kind of kept pace with them for the first half of the quarter, but I wrote down kind of after that, playing more sloppy after our first quarter start. Sohan got in foul trouble. Jonathan Isaac came in. He played a really good game for them overall. You know, it, he's listed at 6'10", and I know that there were a lot of updates to heights and everything, and maybe people have a distorted view of height. That's a whole nother conversation, Ethan.
Mm.
But I would agree with Sean and Bill. They were like, I don't know if he's 6'10". And I remember back in the day, I believe he was listed at 6'11", maybe 7 foot. But when he was standing next to Wemby, I'm sure like the mohawk he has, helps a little bit. But
Mm.
dude, he's one of the best people that I've seen guard Wemby, and obviously that has to do with his frame. And he didn't completely shut him down, but because of the fact that he's someone who has similar length to him, but is also fluid in his mobility, he just was able to match some things that most people, can't match Wemby in, other than like maybe like somebody like Chet or something. Um, but he caught a couple lobs early, and there was another lob that they tried to throw where he just caught it and then went up with the dunk. He was let me see how many points he had tonight, but I really noticed him in the second quarter, and he also played good defense throughout. He only had 8 points tonight and 4 for 7, no threes, but most of those were in the paint, but also 4 blocks for Jonathan Isaac tonight too. So he was making an impact on both sides of the floor. Um, Devin had a huge. This is how I wrote it. I wrote it down as huge at the time because it kind of felt like Orlando was maybe having the chance to run away and
Mm.
build a little bit more of a lead than they did. And Devin drew a foul on a 3 late. He only hit 2, but still, those were in the moment. It was like, okay, to get a 3 here or even 3 free throws is big. Um, and then um, he also got a bucket at the end that was almost a buzzer beater. And Mark here, one of our OGs in the comments, he says, "I just have an ad in your live." Um, so we do have ads in our lives, and I have kind of updated the way that they're used. So I'm sorry about that, but hopefully we should be back afterwards. That'll happen. I was just wondering, when I first read that, I thought he might have been like, I'm only getting ads and not the actual stream. But we're
Mm.
getting some other comments, so I don't think that's the case. But shout out to you, Mark, for being in here and sitting through the ad for real. Um, but yeah, so Devin had some big buckets late. He had 4 points basically on 2 straight possessions late that was able to kind of keep it at 6 points. I believe Devin was our leading scorer at halftime, but maybe it was Wemby. I'm not sure.
Mm.
But yeah, that was my take on the second. It was kind of like we were hanging on. We were kind of hanging on by a thread just to hang around and compete. Um, and then a lot of those things that they were able to take advantage of, or that they started to take advantage of in the second, just got completely exacerbated in the third after second half adjustments.
Mm.
And I'll dish it to you now, Ethan. The floor is yours for the wonderful show that you walked into.
Thank you. One question for you, though, Jude, before I take
Okay.
over the third
Okay.
quarter. I believe this is when Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham both came in together on the bench unit. Obviously, Keldon Johnson wasn't there. Not great numbers, but how did they look together in the backcourt?
Honestly, I don't. I think that they brought Blake in by himself at first,
Mm-hmm.
and then they brought Malachi in later. So they were both back there, but I don't. Not a
Nothing
lot stood
memorable.
out. Nothing, yeah, nothing memorable. But I think also they were staggered a little bit. And notice Blake only had 12 minutes tonight. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that was because of his play. I think that was more just because of the nature of the game and because we
Yeah.
were getting blown out. We had Malachi out there for a little bit, longer in the fourth, and then obviously we had the run that we did. So then that prompted us to sub some other guys in. But yeah, nothing too memorable, but also. Nothing necessarily terrible. I would say though, you can see Malachi in only 15 minutes, 4 rebounds. That's what I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about. But
That's good.
really, Blake's defense, he had a good steal. I thought he had two, and it's escaping me at what point of the game this was, but I believe it was at some point in the first half. I could be wrong there, or no,
He had
that
one in
was
the
in the
fourth
third.
quarter
That
against
was in
Joe
the third.
Ingles.
Yeah, I'm tripping. That's what I'm thinking of.
Mm.
Um, but Blake did his normal. Like there wasn't anything that stood out to me that was like, oh my gosh, he's playing terrible. Honestly, as much as I was just mentioning Malachi, I would still say that I probably I liked Blake's game tonight more than Malachi's. But
Mm.
these are kind of like we're looking at these numbers. I don't know how impactful like
Either of them really were at the
yeah,
end of the day.
yeah, this is just more of a, little the youngins discussion.
Mm. Yeah. Cool. Well, that brings us into the third quarter, and I was getting ready to take very detailed notes because I thought I was going to watch a very interesting competitive game. When in reality, the Orlando Magic showed us why they're the fourth best defensive team in the NBA. They completely walloped us in that third quarter. We lost 34-21 in the third quarter. From what I saw, we could barely make an entry pass or make a dribble handoff without getting picked off. The Magic were picking us up at half court, pressing our ball handlers, and our offense was very stagnant. We looked flustered. And when we get flustered, like we continually say, game plan goes out the window. Guys start missing open passes. This ball speed was slow. The player movement was hindered by the Orlando Magic, and that affects everything. Defense is suddenly weak because the Orlando Magic are playing with higher pace because they're feasting off of turnovers in the third quarter, getting downhill and making easy layups. Jalen Suggs had a great game defensively. And I agree with what you said about Jonathan Isaac. I really think he may have had the best defensive performance on Victor Wembanyama one-on-one that we've seen this year. And a lot of that stems from him being 6'11", 7 feet tall, long, like you said, and just more filled out right now than Wemby. So Wemby wasn't able to strength him, and he wasn't able to really length him either. So from what I saw from Wemby, he looked very frustrated. His numbers overall are solid. You know what you would expect from Wemby: 7 for 15. That's pretty efficient. 8 boards, 6 blocks, 21 points. Um, I'm curious. Like I saw a comment earlier saying that his energy was a little lackluster. They felt like he was maybe frustrated by the defense of Orlando. Um, from what I saw in limited time, that appeared to be slightly true, but I only watched the second half. So I don't know if that's fact. And it didn't help his case that the big run that we made was with Dominic Barlow on the court and not him. But something to keep your eye on, I guess, moving forward for him. Maybe Jonathan Isaac is the Wemby stopper. I'm knocking on wood because I hope Wemby hears that because I know he takes things personally. Um, but to be completely frank and honest with you, dude, that's pretty much the only takeaways I had from that third quarter. It was a complete travesty for the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, you you said it as best that I could. I mean, the one positive thing in that quarter you could say is because of Blake, there was a 6-0 run at the end of the quarter.
Mm,
But uh, I'll just read what I had written down just to say it. Not the best rotations and attention to detail to start. Not as connected as the first half. Turnover fest.
mm.
9-0 run starting at the 7-minute mark for Orlando. Rushed offense. God awful quarter. Insane fall off. That's what I wrote down. And as I say that, look at the comment we got right here from Naz. He says, "I don't think I've ever seen an NBA team commit that many turnovers in a row. That third quarter was just painful.
Mm.
It was like we were in the twilight zone." That is a very good way to
Mm.
describe it. You know, maybe like the Pistons might have done that earlier this year.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
but in all seriousness, I don't think I've watched a Spurs game in my life, Ethan, that I can remember, at least in this moment, where we've had that many straight turnovers. I don't even think I saw that last year, but maybe that's just me not remembering last year's games.
I don't know off the top of my head. It was definitely one of the ugliest I've seen in recent memory. But to have one positive, I think Mark's comment, like 4 comments up, Jude Blake showing some shade of young DeJounte with his defense. That's pretty true. From the minimal time I saw Blake out there, he was doing his best to just try and give the team some energy and hope by picking up his guy at half court, hounding him. I think he may have had that steal on Joe Ingles at the end of this quarter, like you were mentioning earlier, which led to a dunk for him on the other end. So shout out to him for at least trying. But at the end of the day, we lost the quarter by 13 points.
Yeah, and really, like, if you take away that 6-0 run for the majority of the quarter, that's
Mm,
34-15. So
not
that's
good.
basically a 20-point loss. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you take
Which
away and in the end of the quarter, they were being a little, when you have a quarter like that and you're the Magic, you're going to let up a little bit. And that's actually a time where you can. I mean, well, with the way the fourth quarter went, maybe they shouldn't have, but they still
mm,
pulled it out.
still pulled it out, which brings us into the fourth quarter, Jude. Unless you had anything else to say about the third, we're good. Fourth quarter, it is. Again, wasn't really taking notes because it started pretty much like the third quarter had gone the entire time, with the Spurs playing without energy, being disconnected on both ends of the floor, and Orlando really led by the Wagner twins. Are they twins or are they just brothers?
They're just brothers.
Just brothers. The
It's
Wagner
okay.
brothers.
It's okay. Bill Land thought so too.
I
Or
couldn't
actually,
remember.
I don't know if it was Bill Land, but one of Bill or Sean thought that they were twins, and then the other
Mm.
broadcast mate corrected them. So don't feel bad.
The Wagner brothers and a little bit Markel Fultz. I think he had a couple mid-range jumpers that kind of felt like daggers at times, but like they were just piecing our defense up. We had nobody that could physically defend either of them, and they play so well off of each other. Like Franz was just getting on the inside and making easy baskets with little to no physicality from our bigs and our perimeter defenders. They were just letting him get to the rim. Um, but with that being said, we had a couple moments, a couple brief like comebacks of like 3-0 runs, 5-0 run that would immediately get swallowed up. And it's like, okay, no, we're going to lose. But then, led by Devin Vassell, really, and a unit without Victor Wembanyama, but with your boy Dominic Barlow at center, we were somehow able to make a comeback and cut it to within 3. We may have tied it, but I don't think we did. Cut it to within 3 points, led by Devin Vassell, who was shooting lights out. And who else hit a couple shots there? I think Jeremy hit a clutch 3. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Chetty hit a couple shots,
There you
and
go. I'm
and
pulling up the
Dominic as well.
play-by-play.
I want to say Dominic had a really key block that led to an easy basket on the other end. So the energy that these guys brought together in this weird unit, combined with the home team crowd, that I think is what you alluded to in the first quarter, kind of brought us back. And we saw glimpses of what could be, when we're actually playing, at a competitive level, and playing with solid details, rotating. I really just think it comes down to energy. There was no energy in that third quarter, and somehow we brought it back with this little run. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. The Orlando Magic are the better team. They took advantage of the lead that they had. They had created for themselves, put the foot on the gas, and came out on top, winning by 10, 108-98.
Yeah, to sum it up, Ethan, I think we had juice in the first quarter and at times in the fourth quarter, and we did not in the middle of the game.
I'm honestly shocked. This is unrelated to what you just said. I'm sorry, but
No, you're
I'm
good.
shocked that we brought Wemby back into the game, to be honest with you.
I think when we took him out, we weren't planning on bringing him back in. But when we cut the lead to 3, we decided to put him back in.
I honestly would have left him on the bench. I didn't watch the first half. I know he's our franchise player, but I rock him with those 5 boys that brought us back because they were playing so well together.
You heard it here first from Ethan. Dominic Barlow over Victor Wembanyama.
Just in this last 2 minute stretch, like
I'm just playing.
he was playing out of his mind, right? Like Dominic
No,
Barlow,
bro. And then on the last, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, you're
but
good.
you know how
He's your boy. Go ahead.
exactly. The 2 Wendell Carter dunks that he forced misses on, and then on the last one, like Jeremy, like barely. I didn't even really see it. Granted,
Yeah.
I was paying attention more to Dom because I thought that they called it on him. But I guess Jeremy like slapped Wendell's arm a little bit and then got free throws off that. But that was like 2 contests in a row on point blank dunks in the clutch. And let me see his stats here. Yeah, well, they said he only had 1 block, so that block must have been. I think that was it was on Mo Wagner because I texted you. I said don't test Dom. And anyways, yeah. So shout out to Dom Barlow. If you look at the bench box score, it looks like he probably played the best out of everybody tonight. And obviously Shetty played hard. Like even if it wasn't an efficient game for him, he hit some tough shots and he played really hard. So and he had to play a lot tonight. 28 minutes in Keldon's absence. So I don't want to take away, from the things that he did that don't show up on the stat sheet because he does a lot of those. But I really would say that the box score matches the performance of the person who had the best game off the bench tonight. I think it was Dom.
It's tough to argue otherwise, Jude.
Yeah, and it's obviously, the middle of the game wasn't good for anybody. But he did have another solid performance off the bench tonight, Ethan. Where in the moments where we were able to make some runs, he was out there. So obviously it was mainly more in the fourth quarter, but he had some good buckets in the first as well. There was a little dump off where Devin drove in, tossed it to him, had a little lay over Wendell Carter. And just kind of stuff like that as well. He had another basket kind of like that.
Tough.
Yeah. And the other thing I had written down, I don't think I mentioned this about Dom since we're talking about him. In the second quarter, he had a 4-0 run when we were down 44-40. Now, he didn't score both of those points, but he went and got that lay that I just mentioned from Devin. And then he immediately got a steal on the next possession, which led to a layup for Jeremy Sohan in transition. So that was some good stuff. That was a good moment in the second quarter off the bench. But yeah, that's pretty much the wrap up of this one, Ethan.
I think what the guys have to look forward to in 2 days playing the Pelicans with all the size and length that they have will be a difficult test if they come out as lackadaisical and unfocused as they were in that third quarter and second half of the second quarter.
If anything, this was a reminder from Monday's lesson that they learned. And, Sean and Bill were kind of talking about how they probably got chewed out pretty bad after that one. So in the beginning of the game, it was like, oh, we see they're responding to that. And then unfortunately, some of those same tendencies we saw returned and, put us in a hole that despite, incredible effort to cut the lead to 3, was just too much to crawl out of.
Let's turn things around, boys. Zion Williamson's going to dunk all over Doug McDermott, who's going to try and check him at the bench for. Don
I,
Barlow's locking up my guy Zion.
I was about to say.
It's wraps.
It's like, don't say Dom. I can't
Start
do it
Dom. Start
tonight.
Dom.
Tonight hurt too much.
Let's start Dom with the 3.
What was I gonna? Hey, you know what you missed? I think. I don't know. Maybe you didn't miss it. Um, but we had like 2 possessions of Dom and Wemby in the front court, and it was only because Dom was shooting free throws. And he like got subbed out on the very next dead ball, like 2 possessions later for Shetty. But I got to see the Dom and Wemby front court for a defensive possession on an offensive possession, and an offensive possession, and that made me happy.
I think we should flirt with the idea of sending out the starting lineup of Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, Dom Barlow, Victor Wembanyama.
I would love that, but I don't even know if that's a good idea.
Think of the defense, Jude.
Think of the offense, Ethan.
Jeremy's killing it from 3. He's spacing. We're good.
Oh my
We're
God.
locked in. The way my guy Julian's playing, it honestly probably wouldn't even make a difference.
Bro. Anyways, poor guy. Poor guy. That's kind of been the story with Julian a little bit, but he's also not gonna make any critical mistakes at the same time.
He's either
Um,
hitting 8 threes or he's getting zeros
he's
across the
Danny
board.
Green. This is why we brought this up. Like he's either gonna be like
He's
you're gonna
2012 Danny Green. Let's
he's going to be
rephrase that.
going off or he's going to be non-existent. Anyways,
Mhm.
one final note before we wrap this up, Ethan, and it's just been something that I've been thinking about since the last episode, and I know that most people probably didn't take it this way and that you didn't take it this way. And obviously we had to be very critical tonight too, but just as another reminder, because I kind of went hard on Jeremy last time talking
Mhm.
about just how you can have those 2 point performances, and when we were having that conversation you were like, yeah, but I still think he's on a positive trajectory,
Mhm.
just for his career moving forward. And I just want to say, like, I completely agree with that. And even when I talk about Keldon too, obviously he's at a little different, he's at a different place than Jeremy is in his career, but we're here doing this podcast. We're trying to be a forum, a place where Spurs fans can hang out and talk about the game. And, that's just one of the things, that when I look at those guys, that I could see, something that they can improve on, moving forward. Because we got to talk about that at some extent. But I wasn't trying to say that, oh, both of those guys, just because they do that, we're done or I'm out on them. That's not what
Mhm.
I was saying whatsoever. It's just, we gotta talk about the good, and we also got to talk about the bad. And there's a lot of things that I obviously like in their game, but
Mhm.
both of those guys do have that from time to time. And I know with even though this wasn't the prettiest game overall, with Jeremy's performance tonight, like, I know what he's capable of. There's only 2 players this season, Ethan, that are sophomores in the NBA that have had multiple games of 30 points and at least 8 rebounds, and that's Paolo Banchero and Jeremy Sohan. So don't want to take that away from him. I believe I saw some other stat about Keldon, and that one was a little bit more obscure, but it was like of a player of his height having like a 20, 15 plus rebound game.
Mhm.
So they both definitely bring their strengths. But also no player is completely perfect. And the other thing is too that I also want to remind the people is, as much as we criticize these guys, we're also humans, and we realize that we're thankful to be here. And if these
Mhm.
guys weren't playing, as much as this is a struggle of a season, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. So we're not trying to sit here and act like we're better than them, and we couldn't execute anywhere near. If we're criticizing them, whatever we're criticizing, imagine what we would look like. That's what I
Oh,
would say. That's my soapbox, Ethan, for just the humanistic aspect of sports analysis, even though
mm.
it's not something that's emphasized very much. But I'm gonna keep it in my heart, Ethan.
Well said, Jude. I think my feelings can echo yours. Um, I love literally every single player on this team. Like, I want all of them to do well. So if we criticize them, it's because we're Spurs fans. We're fans of the team. We want us to do better. We want them to do better. Um, but like you said, they're amazing anyway. They don't need our they don't need our opinion for them to be who they are and to be as talented
Yeah,
as they are. And we're not in any way as good at basketball or as knowledgeable about basketball as they are. So,
for sure. For sure. This will be the last thing I'll end on. Mark says Jeremy got snubbed in the Rising Stars
mm,
game. And, I get Dyson Daniels as a G League Ignite alum, and he's definitely a really solid player.
for
You
sure.
know what I mean? But I think kind of him being an Ignite alum allowed him to get the in over Jeremy. I'm sure a lot of people remember, a lot of the point guard moments in the national TV games early in the year stick out to people, I'm sure. But yeah, like I mentioned that stat. There's only 2 sophomores that have 30 plus and 8, and also Jeremy's beating him in like every category. And there we go. That's kind of what I just alluded to from Nazcraz. He says I think
Mm.
him playing point guard kind of tanked his chances because that's all that sticks in everybody's mind. But
Sad.
we are going to wrap this one up, y'all. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. I'm not sure exactly when we'll be back, but stay updated on the community tab, turn on the notifications, and follow us on Twitter. Sorry for the pause there on podcast. I was pulling up the graphic. At SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. Don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below if you enjoyed the content. And if you want to support the show, go down to sspn.spreadshop.com. The link is in the bio. And also, it's updated now where the store tab on our YouTube channel, you can directly, if you just click on one of those, that'll take you to the website. But you can also scan this QR code if you want to support the show. I know I got my notification, Ethan, that my merch is on its way. It's shipped. It should be coming in this weekend. So maybe the next podcast we do, hopefully you and I, but at least maybe one of us, will be repping some SSPN gear.
I also got that same email, so you are likely correct.
Let's go. All right. We appreciate y'all. I know this was a tough one. Go Spurs, go. We'll be here regardless.